DeSantis has officially signed into law from the legislature in Florida that gender-affirming surgeries are now banned. Now, in tandem with gender-affirming surgeries are hormones, puberty blockers, anything that is an obstacle or impediment to kids naturally developing until the age of 18. Once you're 18, you're in the age of majority and you can do whatever you want, right? Now, there are still some restrictions in our society. At 18, you can go to the military, you can die for your country, but you have to be 21 to drink alcohol, and now you have to be 21 to use tobacco and other substances. This is inconsistent. We need to pick one age. We can't just rely on, okay, 18, 21, these are two different ages. One has a huge detrimental effect at 18, but the other ones, yes, they're not so good for you, especially for your brain, because your brain is still developing up until the age around 25, give or take a few years. Sometimes it's 24, sometimes it's 26, but your brain is still developing. So you're still constructing your worldview. You're still constructing who you are as a person. You're still developing your character, your personality, all the impressions you're getting from different information. You're still cultivating that to form your own opinion about the world. Now, this is a positive in general for minors, for kids who are under 18, right? This is a positive because if we're using our Constitution, which I mentioned in every single conversation, the Constitution protects life, liberty, and property. All of our founding documents protect life, liberty, and property. Those are very broad terms, but we break it down through interpretation, and then we create laws based off of those interpretations. Now, a lot of laws are not constitutional, but in this case, Florida had to make the outcast decision to actually make this law, which is extremely surprising. This should be common sense in all 50 states, but there are states right now where hospitals are enacting surgeries, hormones, puberty blockers, giving it to underage children and stunting their development, stunting their growth. Now, we're here, we can ask the question, why are we here on this earth? Why do we exist? There are philosophical, spiritual, religious questions. But from a biological point of view, we're here to reproduce. That's our biological purpose, setting aside all the other abstract concepts and ideas. If you're taking a person who is not physically developed, their genitals, whether you're a guy or a girl, they're not developing fully. Let's leave it at that. You're not developing fully, and you're creating an impediment. You're creating a blockade on the development. You are essentially removing a type of life and a type of liberty for that person to utilize their biological reproductive system in the future if they decide to use it. Again, when they hit the age of majority, when they're 18 or older, you can do whatever you want. Now at 18, your brain is still not developed, like I said before. Hopefully you have some kind of support system. There's enough information out there. There's objective information, cultural information, which we know is not happening right now. You have even the federal government encouraging younger children to accept this new lifestyle, this new identity, where you would undergo hormones and different types of treatments, and you would effectively become a lifelong patient to the hospitals. And this would cost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how radical the surgeries are, how radical you're changing your body. So even our own government is implementing the wrong strategy when it comes to developing our youth. But when you remove that prospect from our youth, you're removing a huge part of why they're here in this world. Now, in the future, they may decide they don't want to have kids. They want to change their identity. They want to change their gender. You can do what you want. This is a free country. You have that liberty. But if you're doing it beforehand, now, let me also paint this picture. Parents in America have a lot of give with their children. They have a lot of give, one, because the nuance is, primarily, the nuance is that's 50, you have two parents, 50% of the parents have their DNA in that child, right? So the nuance is they have a lot of control over that child. That's their DNA lineage. It's essentially a copy of their DNA. It's essentially a copy of them, right? And a copy of their ancestry. This allows for a lot of give. You can teach your kids. How I personally think about this is whether or not I agree with it, it doesn't matter, because each parent has a strong control over their DNA lineage constitutionally. So a parent can teach their kids to be a radical socialist, which I would disagree with, or they can teach their kids to be a radical capitalist, which I would more likely agree with. Either one of these beliefs could be detrimental to this kid's future in different areas, but the parent still has a lot of give in those areas. Now, when the parent starts to introduce even the wrong ideology with LGBT and trans, not that you can't be gay and be accepted and have the same rights, you can do all that. But when it becomes further beyond that, when it becomes extremely radicalized in the sense that you're presenting ideas in this person's mind where they may want to get a surgery, they may want to take hormone blockers, they may want to take puberty blockers, that would still be constitutional. Those parents still have free reign to implement those ideologies, the same as, let's say, a conservative parent wants to implement ideologies into a kid of work hard, don't get a girl pregnant, make sure you get married, whatever the stipulations are, the derivative would be from the beliefs of the conservative parent. Both of these beliefs, one of these beliefs, you may agree, you may disagree. Even if it's radical, these parents still have the ability and the constitutional right to implement those ideologies into their child. When it becomes invasive, when it becomes physically irreversible, when it becomes detrimental to life, liberty, or property, in this case, life and liberty, and now this stunts the growth, this stunts the ability for something huge like having a child in the future, now that's unconstitutional. Now the state intervenes. So we don't want the state to intervene at basic surface level levels. We want the state to intervene when it's such a radical infringement of rights that now it would only make sense for the state to intervene. That's also under the assumption that the state has the best interests of the youth, which right now the state does not have the best interests of the youth. So this is kind of a moot point. But my whole point in saying all this is the parents have a lot to give before the state actually needs to intervene itself. I say that because right now, well, I've already said the state is the federal government. It does not have the best interests of the youth. They're pushing all this propaganda. So the state really cannot intervene itself, even though they want to. Like, I've used this example before, but in North Korea, or even in other nations, we can look at other socialist and communist nations in the past and even right now, the state wants to have control over the youth because they're impressionable, they can be easily manipulated, and the state can implement ideologies that would serve the state. Okay, so let's say in China, they need to build up their military. If they make it so that the Chinese government has more authority than the parents, well, the Chinese government can come in and educate however they want. They can educate the kids, and these kids will have a belief system of, oh, I want to serve the Chinese Communist Party. I want to be part of the Liberation Army. I want to be part of that military so we can go and prepare against the Western Front. That is when the state has so much central authority, and all the parents believe, because they've been fed these lies, that the state has a right to do this. So we really don't want the state to intervene, and especially they can't intervene from a constitutional point of view until it's a direct, invasive infringement of rights. So the parents have a lot to give here. The parents can manipulate their children. I don't condone it. I don't like it. And manipulate or influence, one is positive, one has a positive connotation, one has a negative connotation. Depending on which perspective you're in, they can manipulate or influence the children to their ideologies. In fact, parents do this a lot. And naturally, you're going to have bad parents. You're going to have bad people out there. And they're going to make their children's lives a living hell. That's just the reality of nature. That's the reality of the world that we live in. This is a problem when the parents start to push invasive surgeries. In a lot of places, a lot of hospitals, a lot of states, a lot of mayors, governors, a lot of politicians, a lot of people at the tops of different institutions, they not only advocate for this, but they push it. They want these kids to be castrated they want these kids to be castrated. They want these, and maybe not necessarily physically, but it starts with the ideology. It starts with the idea. They plant the seed, that seed grows. Now, it doesn't always stick. Kids right now, especially in the West, have access to different information. Of course, they can be so inoculated with the wrong information that it doesn't matter if there's independent information that says, hey, this is not good for you. This has long-term negative consequences. In fact, there are other people who are now trying to detransition because they've experienced the negative consequences and they were sold a lie when they were young. Now they're in their 20s and they don't enjoy what their life is. They don't enjoy their life right now. And in fact, they're going to have to pay hospital bills for the rest of their life because they've done something that's irreversible, that's extremely damaging to their body. They can never have children. Of course, from a societal point of view, they're never looked at the same. And I don't want to get too dark about this, but there are interviews with certain people who target the underage youth, right? I don't want to get too crazy with the vocabulary here, but people can imagine what I'm talking about. There are interviews with criminals, and they ask the criminals, what made you decide to pick on these certain underage kids? What made you decide to go up to them? Then how did you persuade them? And their answer is always similar. Well, it looked like they had no one around them. They didn't really have a social circle. Their parents maybe were not around, or they were fed the wrong information. They wanted to be loved, they wanted a friend, and they could come in, they were young, they were impressionable, and so this older guy who's going to take advantage of this young kid, which is obviously disgusting and criminal, that's why they're in jail, they would be able to leverage that situation to their benefit. A big part of that is also mental health. When these kids are growing up in broken families, when they're being told over and over again by social media, by the federal government, by politicians, by celebrities, hey, this is how you should think, this is what you should believe in. These kids are brainwashed and they don't really have an outlet of, hey, here's the truth, here's a hand to the light, grab my hand, I'll show you what the truth is. When these kids go to school, when they're seeing commercials, when they're watching TV shows, even right now, we think that if we throw on Netflix, if we throw on Disney, and we put on the kids section, and we're able to go do our chores, and we have our kids sitting down, whatever, we come back, it looks like a kids' TV show, but if you sit there and listen for like 5 minutes, and I don't know the names of these new TV shows, they're saying things, the dialogue, they're saying things, and even the plot, they're introducing LGBT, like it's not bad to be lesbian, gay, bi, trans. Of course, this is different based off your ideology and religion, but from an objective constitutional point of view, you can be whoever you want, you can identify however you want, you can have whatever sexual orientation. The problem is when you start bringing this up to 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds who don't need that information. They can learn about this when they're an adult or even when they're like 16, 17, 18. But there's not even a rational plot behind these kids shows to introduce the LGBT identities. They're being introduced in a random way. It's not even, there's no purpose to it. It's just introducing it for the sake of introducing it. And we've seen through video clips, leaked video clips, that came out years ago of Disney executives talking about how, well, they're obviously super on the left, but they were talking about how they have a kid who's pansexual, they have another kid who's trans, and they want to implement this ideology to 50% of Disney's content. So if we're just looking at this from a logical point of view, fine, let's say you want to introduce some of this LGBT content. You have to match it, you have to mirror it with the right appropriation. If less than 5% of the population is actually falling into LGBT, but you want to make 50% of the content represent that, you're doing a disservice to your demographic, but you're now pushing an agenda, right? You're not trying to mirror and have this representative measurement of what your audience is going to watch. You're creating an agenda. So there's a whole plot behind this. I typically talk about how from the top down, there are certain strategies that are implemented to the culture. And I will talk about that another time. I do talk about it from time to time. In this case, I want to be very focused on hormones, puberty blockers, surgeries for underage kids. Look, you have to be 18 to join the military. You have to be 21 to drink alcohol, 21 to use tobacco, 16 to drive. But now we're living in a society where people are okay, adults, grown adults are okay with children who are 8, 9, 10, having these surgeries, taking hormones that they should not be taking. This is not natural at all. And this is stopping your biological processes. This is a huge infringement because these kids you can't be 21 and all of a sudden, oh, I want to reverse all the puberty blockers. So you would have to take, it's over. You can take testosterone, exogenous testosterone, but that's not going to change the development of your body at that point, right? At a certain point, your body is done developing. Now you can always change, like your brain is plastic, right? So your brain can always change and develop with new impressions, new ideas. In fact, that happens all the time. It does solidify the older you get. So by the time you're in your late 20s and early 30s, you already have a certain worldview. But from a biological point of view, from I guess you could change your physiology a little bit, but from a physical structuring point of view, from an anatomical point of view, you can't change that once you're 20, 25. You can change it a little bit. You can put on some muscle and all that. You can strengthen your bone density up until the point where you get old enough and your DNA starts to miscopy each other. And so, of course, that's when the degradation occurs. But at a certain point, it's too late. So we want these kids to develop themselves mentally and physically in a healthy way. And this is a positive by DeSantis. I criticize DeSantis all the time because he does do things that are unconstitutional. I understand where he's coming from. He's fighting fire with fire, but we still need to play by the Constitution. Now, with the Constitution, you do have a lot of power to go against people who are doing criminal acts. But at the same time, people in this country, no matter how crazy it is, they do have a right to have whatever belief system that they want. The infringement comes on when they start going after someone else's rights, and it's very direct, it's very blatant. In this case, you're taking kids who are not of their own consent. Even when they're 18, they're not fully cognizant, okay? All of us were dumb at 18. They're not fully cognizant at 18, but especially at 12 or 13, when they're just trying to fit in and conform with everyone else, when they're getting all this information of how they should feel, think, and act, and it's largely improper information to teach them to be weak and soft, and to just give in to this mass propaganda of just change your identity and be more feminine, and here's actually steps you can take to do that, and you can do something that's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. These are not the kind of ideas we want to spread into these kids. Of course, that's not unconstitutional, but once you infringe on it, that's when we need to step in. That's when we take action against people. People always talk about how there are drag shows. Drag shows, by the First Amendment, are publicly allowed. What's happening? The parents are taking their kids there. So yes, we can boycott certain companies, like people are boycotting Target right now because there's LGBT clothing in Targets right now. And so a lot of people are boycotting the Target. Okay, fine, you can do that. It's also the right of the private company to have those clothes in that business. So you speak with your dollar, you speak with your voice. With the drag shows, we have to also acknowledge, like I said, there's nuance, right, with the parents and the child. If the parents are taking their children there, at a certain point, they're screwing up their own lineage. We can voice our opinion, we can be critical, but we can't ban drag shows. I don't agree with it, but you can't ban something that is a constitutionally protected right. So they can have that. Or sometimes these drag queen story hour, they're in public libraries and kids are sitting down. Yes, I wholeheartedly disagree with the notion that we should be spreading propaganda, spreading these wrong ideas to the children, but ultimately the parents have the discretion of bringing their children there. And so what does that say? It says that that DNA lineage is not going to go well. So we're looking at it in the micro, within the span of a few months or a few years. Over the course of 1,000 or tens of thousands of years, you'll have natural selection. And I'm being more macro, and a lot of people may say this is kind of, the more macro you get, the less personal it becomes, right? Right now it's very personal because we're looking in the micro, and I agree with that. But the more you spread out the timeline, the more macro you get, the less personal it gets. And so you can understand how different people's genetics, they die out, and they die out for different reasons. This is one of the reasons, right? So if you're a parent and you're listening to this and you've been thinking about taking your kid to a drag queen story hour, or you've been thinking of taking your kid to a pride event and your kid is 5 years old, rethink your situation. Do you want your kid to have the right mentality so that they can propagate the species with your DNA lineage, instead of mentally castrating this person or leading them to a situation where they would physically castrate themselves in the future when they're an adult? You need to think about this situation as an adult. Now, a lot of these adults, they have the mind virus. They're so... This is inexplicable at this point. You can have people who are so deranged that they're willing to even sacrifice their own kids, but they think it's part of the right system. There are people who feed their cats a vegan lifestyle. Cats are carnivorous. You don't feed them plants, right? At a certain point, that's abuse, right? But there's a lot of gray areas here, but there's also black and white. And when we step in is when there's an infringement. I don't want to go off in a tangent anymore. It's good that DeSantis did this. We need more states to do this. We need more implementation of this. The real cure for this problem is culture. When we change the culture, we don't really have to change political policy too much. It all stems down to culture. What are all the financial institutions propagating? The biggest thing is the media institutions. When you create media, when you create cartoons, when you create movies, when you create books, when you create stories, right? We've evolved with storytelling. Humans love to storytell. That's how we spread information down for generations before we could actually write things down and save the writings. When you spread that down with the right culture, you create strong civilizations. You create strong men and strong women. And you create cohesive families. And not just a nuclear family structure where it's a man, a woman, and 2 kids, but strong families where you have the grandparents, you have the cousins, everyone's helping each other out, everyone is supporting each other. That's what we need to revert back to. But in the modern era where we have all this technology, that's where we need to cultivate the right assimilation.